Hello guys, welcome to my SQL series on learning. My name is Nse. In this video, we are going to look at more constraints and also see how to alter tables. Let's get started. We have the unique constraint. Unique constraint ensures that a value is not repeated in the same column. This means that no two rows can have the same value in a specified column. Let's head over to command line client and see how this works. So here in the command line client, let's select database to use. I want to use the bookstore database because I know it is in there somewhere. Semicolon and then enter. And now let's create a table that has the unique constraint. For that, I'll come to my workbench because I have typed out some queries just for convenience. And then the query I want to use now is this query that creates a table students, and this table has a column full name set to varchar 50. It has another column student ID varchar set to maximum limit of 10, and then notice that we have unique written just by student ID. This means that it is this student ID column that has the unique constraint. So this unique constraint on the student ID column is going to ensure that no two students have the same student ID. Every student is going to have his or her own unique student ID. Now I'm going to copy this query and I'll come here, I'll right click and paste, and I'll hit enter to execute. Query is okay, so this table has been created. Now let's insert into the table. For this, I'll come back here and I'll copy this query that's inserting into students, and I'll paste and I'll hit enter, and query is okay. If we select star from students, you're going to notice that we have two students, John J, Jeff Shen, and then these are their student ID, P122 for John J and P234 for Jeff Shen. Now let's try and insert again into student. I'll come back here and I'll copy this query. I had to type it out already because it is going to be a lot of creating tables and inserting. So just to maximize time, I had to type them out already. So I'm going to copy this query and I'll head over here to command line client. I'll paste and I will hit enter to execute. We have an error because the column name does not exist. So this should be full name because it is full name that we have in the table. So I would have full name, and then I'll copy the query again and I'll paste it here in the command line client. And now notice that we have another error here, and this error says duplicate entry P122 for key student, the student ID. So what this means, what this error is trying to tell us is that we already have a student with the student ID P122, and as such we cannot insert another student with that same student ID. That's because we have the unique constraint, this unique constraint on the student ID column. Now let's change the ID to 123, and I'm going to copy this code again. Another advantage of typing here on Workbench is that you can easily have your query and make changes as you want. That's by the way. So I'm going to copy this and let's try to insert again, and I'll hit enter. Now notice that now the query is okay because Jane now has a unique student ID. There is no student in this student table currently with the ID P123. So that is why we have been able to insert Jane. I hope that you get the point. So the unique constraint ensures that no two students can have the same student ID in this student table. Now, let's talk about the check constraint. Basically, the check constraint checks a column for set conditions. So, for instance, as we can see here, we have this create table syntax, and this table is going to be called staff, and in it we have one column age, and we are using the check constraint. So this check constraint is going to check to ensure that every age that goes into the age column of this table is greater than 18. Otherwise, there's going to be an error. Let's head back to command line client. So here in the command line client, we are going to write that query. I already have it typed here, so I'm going to copy it and I'll paste it here, and I'll hit enter to execute it. So this table, the staff table, has been created. Now let's insert into staff table. So for this, I'll come back to the workbench, and I have this query already typed. So I'll copy it. It's inserting into staff, and the age column, obviously it's the only column we currently have in the staff table, and the value is 20. So I will right click and I will paste and I will hit enter, and notice that we have query OK. Now let's select star from staff, semicolon, I'll hit enter. Notice that we have the value of 20 entered under age. Now let's see another example, this time using a value that's less than 18, a value that does not meet this condition, age greater than 18. So I'm going to head back here. I have it typed. So I'm going to copy, insert into staff, age, and this time the value of age is 10. And so we have this check constraint error. It's telling us that check constraint, this name, staff underscore chk on underscore 1 is violated. So we have this error because we are trying to enter an age that does not satisfy this condition. So this check constraint is going to take any condition that is assigned, and then it is going to ensure that that condition is met. Otherwise, it will throw this check constraint violation error. Now notice how this value that is in quotes looks kind of difficult to read. This here is the default name that MySQL has given to this constraint that we created here. We can provide a name for each constraint that we set in any column in our table. This is going to allow us to have names that are more relatable and more familiar to us. To do that, we make use of something called named constraints. While trying to assign a name to a constraint, the syntax looks like so. This is just like the query we saw a second ago, only that the table name is staff2, because MySQL is now going to allow us to create two tables with the same name. So I added 2 here to make that difference. Now we have the age column, and we still want this check constraint on the age column, but then we want to give this constraint a custom name. I choose to call it age check. Now let's head back to command line client. So in the command line client, I'm going to create this table that has a constraint that's named. So I'll copy this query that says create table the table name is staff 2. I'll copy it, and here I'm going to paste it, and I'll hit enter to execute it. It says okay. So we still have the same age column set to int, and then we still have the same constraint. Age has to be greater than 18 for a new row to be created. So now I have this table created, the staff 2 table created. Let's insert into staff 2. I will just come here and I'll copy this query that says insert into staff 2. We are inserting into the age column, and the value is 10. 10 is obviously not greater than 18, so we should have the check constraint violation error. Now I'll paste this code, and notice that we have this error, the exact same error that we had here, only that now the constraint now has that custom name that we assigned to it, age check. That's the name that we gave to it here. So you can decide the name to give to your constraint. If you don't give a name to your constraint while setting it, then MySQL is going to give you a default name. Having constraints name can be very useful, especially when removing the constraints from the table. Now, it is possible to have one constraint applied to multiple columns in a table. So you can have a table where you place a constraint on more than one column. Like we have here, we have this unique constraint, and it's going to work on a combination of staff name and phone. So this means that the combination of this staff name and phone has to always be unique. So the uniqueness in this case is enforced based on the uniqueness of the combination of staff name and phone. In this staff 3 table, staff can have the same name, but staff cannot have the same combination of name and phone. Let's head back to command line client. I have this query on the workbench creating the staff 3 table. So I'm going to copy this query, and I'll come here, I'll paste it, and I'll hit enter to execute it. So query is okay. We have been able to create the staff 3 table. Now let's insert into it. I'll come back to workbench, and I'll copy this query that's inserting into staff 3. I'll come here, I'll right click, and I'll paste, and I'll hit enter to execute it. So we have been able to insert these values. Let's now select star from staff 3. I need a semicolon to execute it. So we now have this table. Notice that here Jeff has the same name, and we do not have any errors because the phone numbers are different. Now let's try to insert again. I have copied, and I'll paste, and I'll hit enter to execute it. Now notice that we have duplicate entry, and this time it's showing a combination of both the first name and the phone number. That's because the unique constraint is on these 2 columns. I hope that that's clear. Using multiple constraints is a common requirement, especially if you're dealing with situations where individual attributes alone might not be unique. In the example we just saw, you cannot ensure that staff do not have the same names. Generally, names are easily the same. So you may want to combine the name value with other values to ensure the desired uniqueness. Now notice that at every point where we talked about a new constraint, we created a new table. The good news is that there is an easier way to do this. we can make changes to already existing tables. So this way we do not have to create a new table each time. Imagine that you were working in a real life situation and you've built a table that has 20 different columns or maybe 10 different columns, and you have inserted values into them, and you've been able to create rows that are up to 1000 or even more, and you realize that you need to make changes or a change to the table. You do not have to scrap out the whole table and start creating and inserting values afresh. You can easily make changes to such a table. This brings us to talking about how to alter tables. Now, there are many reasons that you may want to alter a table. You may alter a table to add new columns. You may alter a table to drop columns. You may alter a table to rename it, rename the table or rename a column or modify a column or add constraints. Many reasons to alter a table. So this is a very important concept. Now let's see how it works. Let's try and add a column to an existing table. Let's head over to command line client and see how to add a column to an already existing table. So we are going to use this syntax just like it is here. We will have alter table, and then we will provide the name of the table that we are trying to alter. In this example, the table is staff 3, and then we will have add column. Then we will write the name of the column that we want to add, and then we will set the data type, just like you would provide column name and data type while creating a table. Let's head over to command line client and put this to use. To add a column to an already existing table, I'm going to use this query that is going to add a column to the staff table. And so I have alter table, the table name is staff, and I want to add column. The column name is phone, and varchar is the data type. I am setting maximum limit to 15. So I'll copy this, and here on command line client I'll paste it. But right before I paste it, we have a table called staff. Let's describe staff. So notice that currently the table staff only has one column, and that column is the age column. Now I'm going to paste in this query that's going to add another column. I'll hit enter to execute it. It says query okay. Now I'm going to describe staff semicolon. That's an error. I mistakenly typed a colon in place of semicolon. So I'm going to take that again. Describe staff. And now notice that we have this phone column added. Right before executing this alter table query, we only had the age column. So now after we have executed this alter table query where we added a column called phone, we now have phone column added. And if we want to insert into staff, then we can insert into both age and phone. Let the values be age 23, phone 234112123, and I'll close and end with a semicolon. I'll hit enter, and now query is okay. Now if we select star from staff, so we have this funny value here. I'll bring back that query. I'm going to insert into staff. The columns are age and phone. and this time I'll have 26 for age, and I'm going to ensure that the value for phone number is wrapped with quotes because we're using varchar here. So I'm going to have this value. I'll end with a semicolon. I'll hit enter. Query is okay. And if we select star from staff, notice now that we have this age added and the phone number added in the exact way we want it. We have this funny value here because while inserting phone number at this point, I did not wrap the value with quotation marks. So this is basically showing how you can add a column to an already existing table. I hope that that's clear. Now let's take a look at how to drop a column. So to drop a column, you simply have alter table, the table name, and then you have drop column. You specify the column to drop. In this example, the table is staff 3 and the column to drop is the phone column. Now let's head back to command line client and put this to use. So I'm going to open the workbench because I have most of my queries already typed here. So I have this query that is going to alter this staff table and it's going to drop the phone column. So we have alter table, the table name is staff, and then we have drop column. The column we want to drop is the phone column. So I will copy this query and I'll paste it here and I'll hit enter to execute. So we have that query is okay. Now if we describe that staff table, notice that that phone column is no longer there. It is gone. So that's simply how to drop a column. Type alter table, provide the table name, then you have drop column and provide the column that you want to drop. And of course, don't forget to end with a semicolon. Now let's see how to rename a table. There are two ways to do this. This is one of the ways. You simply have rename table, you write the current name of the table, then you have to, and then you provide the new name of the table. That's what you want to replace the current name with. So here in command line client, let's have rename table, and I want to rename the staff table to, I'll call it workers. Now I'll end with a semicolon. I'll hit enter. Query is okay. Now if I describe staff, you're going to notice that we have an error, and the error says that the table staff does not exist in the bookstore database. That's because we have just changed the name of the staff table to workers. Now let's describe workers and let's see what we get. Workers, I'll hit enter, and we have this description showing exactly the same description that we had when we described staff just before renaming it to workers. So this goes for that to show to us that we have been able to rename staff table to workers. Alternatively, we can use alter table, then provide the current name of the table, and then we have rename to, then we give it the new name of the table. Let's head back to command line client. Okay, so in here we can have alter table, and now the table we want to alter is workers, and then we would have rename to, I'll call it interns this time, end with a semicolon. And so we have alter table, the table name workers, we want to rename to interns, so we are changing the name workers to interns. Let's hit enter to execute. Query is okay. Now if we try to describe workers, you will notice that we have an error telling us that workers does not exist. However, if we describe interns, we are going to have this table description, the exact description that we had for workers, show up for interns. That's because we have been able to rename workers table to interns. So the new table name now is interns. Now, as you can see, we have two ways of doing it. The choice is totally up to you. You can decide to use the syntax that has just rename table, or you could decide to use the syntax that has alter table. That's totally up to you. It's possible to rename columns. Now let's see how to rename a column. To rename a column, you are going to have alter table and then provide the table name. This is employees, but since we are working with interns now, I'll change it to interns. And then we are going to rename age to, let's rename age to DOB. Let's have DOB for date of birth in place of age. So I'm going to copy this query and I'll come here and I will paste it, and then I'll hit enter to execute it. We are unable to rename the age column in interns table because check constraint uses the column age, and so we are unable to drop or rename it. But I insist on showing this example. So we can use the students table. In the students table, let's rename the student ID column to ID. So we are going to have alter table students, and we are going to rename column students ID to just ID, and then we'll have a semicolon and then we'll hit enter. Notice that we have been able to rename the student column. Let's select star from students. Notice now that we have ID in place of student ID. Up here, before renaming the column, we had student ID. Now, after renaming the column, we have ID, and we can alter table students and we can rename column ID to, I'm going to take it back to student ID just so that we see how it works. Student ID. So I'll hit enter and we'll execute it. The query is okay. So now let's select star from student. Notice now that we have student ID in place of ID. So that's basically how to rename a column. Now let's take a look at modifying existing columns. After a table is created, you can change the column definitions. By column definitions, I mean like data type, like constraints. This is what modifying existing columns refers to. You can change the data type, you can add and drop constraints, etc. This is the syntax. You start with alter table and then you provide the table name and you have modify, and then you provide the column that you want to modify. Let's go to command line client. So here in the command line client, we're going to write some queries. Obviously, I'll get them from workbench, and here I have this query to alter employees table. Let's describe employees. I think we still have that table somewhere. Okay, good. So we have the employees table and it's here. For instance, the first name column has data type of varchar, and this is set to maximum limit of 50. So we want to modify this data type and make the maximum limit to be, let's say, 100. So for that, we are going to have alter table. The table name is employees, and then we will have modify. We want to modify the first name column and increase the varchar maximum limit. So I'll copy this query and I'll paste it in here, and we have that query is okay. Now let's describe employees. Notice now that the first name column has maximum limit of 100, just because we have modified it and we have said that we want the new limit to be 100 by this line of query, and so we have 100 here. It has changed from 50 to 100. Now let's see how to modify a table to drop a constraint. For that, you'd simply have alter table, the name of the table to alter, and then you have drop constraint, and then you specify the constraints to drop. We are going to copy this query from the workbench. So it is in table 2 that we have the age check constraint. So this query is going to have the table staff 2. The age check constraint is in this staff 2 table. So I'm going to copy, and over here I'm going to paste, and I'm going to say alter table staff 2 drop the constraint age check. Now let's hit enter. Query is okay. Remember that the age check constraint mandated that age has to be greater than 18 to be inserted into staff 2 table. And remember that while we tried to insert the age of 10, we had the check constraint violation error. Now that that constraint has been dropped, let's try and insert age with the value of 10 again. Let's hit enter, and notice that query is okay. We do not have any error. So this shows that we have successfully been able to drop that age check constraint, and so we are able to enter an age that is not greater than 18. Now let's select star from staff 2, and we have age 10. We have been able to add age 10. That's basically how to drop a constraint. You type alter table, the name of the table to alter, then you have drop constraint, then the constraint, the name of the constraint that you want to drop. This is why it is important to give your constraints custom names. If a constraint has a custom name and you need to drop it at any point, it is going to be easier for you to work with the custom name than to work with the name that is auto-generated by MySQL. I hope that you get the point. Now let's see how to modify a column to add a constraint. You can see it's a lot of queries today, so I had to take the time to type it all out so that the video does not become too long. So we are going to see how to modify an existing column to add a constraint. The syntax is like so. You would have alter table, you provide the name of the table. In this case, the table is staff 3, and then you have add constraint. Then give your constraint a name, any name that you want. Then you have check, and then you provide the condition. We have check because the constraint that we want to add is the check constraint. And the way that check constraint works is that you have check written, you have parentheses, and then you provide the condition to check within the parentheses. Let's see an example of how to modify a column to add a constraint. We still have this employees table. Let's modify this age column such that any employee who is less than 18 years cannot be added to this table. We're going to alter table employees, and we will add this constraint. Notice the syntax: alter table. The table we want to alter is employees table, and we want to add constraint, and we call the constraint age check. And this constraint is going to check age to be sure that any value of age entered into the employees table is greater than 18. Now I'll come here and I'll paste it, and query is okay. Now let's insert into employees. I'm only going to insert into the age column, so I would have age just for want of time, and I'm going to set values. Let's have 15, and let's end with a semicolon and hit enter. Now notice that we have the check constraint violation error. It says check constraint age check, because that's the name of the constraint. Age check is violated. So we have been able to modify a column on this employees table to include a desired constraint. For more on alter tables, visit my SQL docs on alter table statement. I have provided this link in the description. This is it for today. If you have any questions or comments, please say them in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to learning. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.